somewhere above the jungle of New Guinea, a single American fighter is climbing through a broken cloud. The date is early March 1943. The pilot is a 22-year-old lieutenant from a small farm in Wisconsin. His name is Richard Bong. Below him, the dense green canopy stretches in every direction, ahead and above. 9 shapes move against the bright Pacific sky. 9 Japanese fighters, each one able to turn tighter than his larger American fighter, each one carrying a pilot trained to fight in tight circles until the enemy makes a mistake. And the lieutenant is alone. His squadron is not behind him. His wingman is not beside him. His radio is the only voice he will hear, and right now it is not bringing him good news. The airfield he took off from minutes ago is under attack. The fighters that should be with him are scattered. So here is the problem. 9 against 1. Several minutes of fuel for a serious fight. A limited supply of ammunition, split between 4 heavy machine guns and a 20mm cannon in the nose of his twin-engine Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Fuel for only a short fight, 9 opponents, 1 way out. Back at the strip, no one could follow him into that fight. What happened next should not have worked. Every manual, every textbook, every calculation said a single fighter against 9 should not survive. And yet, by the time the sky cleared, the lone pilot had shot down 2 enemy planes and walked away with his life. This is how he did it. To understand how Richard Bong ended up alone over the jungles of the Pacific, you need to go back to a small farm outside the village of Poplar in northern Wisconsin. He was born there on September 24, 1920, the eldest of 9 children. His father, Carl, had come to America from Sweden. His mother, Dora, was of Scottish and English roots. As a boy, Richard watched mail planes fly low over the farm. They were heading to a temporary post office set up when President Calvin Coolidge spent a summer nearby. That sound, the buzz of a single engine overhead, planted something in him that never left. He built model airplanes. He talked about flying, and when he was old enough to enroll at the State Teachers College in Superior, he joined the civilian pilot training program and earned his private pilot license on his 20th birthday. In May of 1941, 7 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor, Richard Bong enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps as an aviation cadet. He was a natural. By January of 1942, he had earned his wings and was commissioned as a second lieutenant. His first assignment was as a gunnery instructor in Arizona, but he did not stay grounded for long. Transferred to Hamilton Field in California, the young pilot was introduced to the aircraft that would define his career and save his life more than once. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Now, here is the key. The P-38 was unlike any other American fighter of the war. It had 2 engines, not 1. It had a twin-boom tail, and all of its weapons, 4 50 caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, were mounted in the nose. That meant every bullet flew straight ahead, no aiming to the side, no calculating angles. Point the nose at the target and fire. But the P-38 was also large. It was heavy. It could not turn as tightly as the small, nimble Japanese fighters it would face, so the P-38 pilot had to fly differently. He had to use speed. He had to use altitude, dive in fast, hit hard, and pull away before the enemy could turn around. American pilots called this boom and zoom. It was not elegant, but it worked, if you had the discipline to stick with it. In the fall of 1942, Richard Bong arrived in the Southwest Pacific. He was assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, based first in Darwin, Australia, and then moved forward to New Guinea. The war in the Pacific was desperate. Japan held most of the Western Pacific. New Guinea was one of the last barriers standing between Japan and Australia, and the air war over those jungles was vicious. By late December of 1942, Bong had scored his first aerial victories, shooting down 2 enemy planes during the Battle of Buna. By January of 1943, he had become an ace, a pilot with 5 confirmed victories. He was building a reputation as a quiet, effective fighter. His commander, General George Kenney, had noticed him and admired his flying instinct. Now watch what happens next. Because in early March of 1943, the war in the skies above New Guinea was about to reach one of its fiercest moments. And Richard Bong was about to face the hardest fight of his life. In the first days of March 1943, a massive Japanese convoy set sail from Rabaul on the island of New Britain. 8 transport ships and 8 destroyers carried nearly 7,000 troops. Their mission was to reinforce the Japanese garrison at Lae, on the northern coast of New Guinea. If those soldiers landed, the Allied campaign in the region would be set back badly. Allied intelligence learned the convoy was coming and prepared an attack. General Kenny, commanding the 5th Air Force, prepared a devastating response. On March 2nd and 3rd, waves of American and Australian bombers and fighters attacked the convoy in the waters of the Bismarck Sea. They used a new technique called skip bombing, flying at dangerously low altitude and releasing bombs that skipped across the water before slamming into the sides of Japanese ships. The result was one of the most complete Allied air victories of the entire Pacific War. All 8 transports were sunk. 4 of the escorting destroyers were destroyed. About 2,900 Japanese soldiers and sailors were killed or drowned. Fewer than a quarter of the intended reinforcements ever reached shore. The Japanese high command was stunned. After this, Japan became far more cautious about sending big convoys through those waters. But Japan was not finished. The losses at the Bismarck Sea demanded a response. Within days, Japanese air commanders began organizing retaliatory strikes against Allied airfields in New Guinea. The message was clear. If the Allies could reach out across the sea and destroy a convoy, Japan would reach back and strike the airfields that made those attacks possible. And that brings us to March 11, 1943. The 9th Fighter Squadron was based at Haranda, a forward airstrip near Dobodora on the eastern coast of New Guinea. That morning, a formation of Japanese bombers and fighters swept in to attack the field. The attackers included Japanese single-seat fighters built for speed, range, and tight turns. Now, here is a brief explanation of why the Oscar mattered. The Ki-43 was the most widely used Army fighter in the Japanese military. It was lightweight, fast in a turn, and extraordinarily nimble. A skilled Oscar pilot could turn inside almost any Allied fighter in a dogfight, but that agility came at a terrible cost. The early Oscar models had almost no armor for the pilot. They had no self-sealing fuel tanks, and they carried only 2 machine guns, far less firepower than the P-38. One good burst from Lightning's nose guns could tear an Oscar apart, but to land that burst, the P-38 pilot had to get the angle right, and he had to avoid getting drawn into a turning fight he could not win. So here's the problem. On that March morning, Lieutenant Richard Bong was airborne when the Japanese struck. Exactly how he became separated from other friendly aircraft is not described in full detail by surviving records. What is known is that he found himself alone in the sky, with 9 Ki-43 Oscar fighters closing in around him. Think about what 9-to-1 odds actually mean in the air. It does not just mean 9 chances to be shot down. It means 9 pairs of eyes watching your every move. 9 pilots who can take turns attacking while the others rest and reposition. If 3 come at you from one direction, you turn to avoid them, and the other 6 are waiting. Every escape route is covered. Every direction has teeth. For the lone pilot, the math is almost impossible. You have a fixed amount of ammunition. Every burst you fire is ammunition you will not have later. You have a fixed amount of fuel. Every hard turn, every dive and climb burns fuel faster, and you are the only one spending those resources. The 9 opponents can rotate. They can share the work. You cannot. But Bong had something the Oscar pilots did not expect. He had the P-38 Lightning, and in this particular fight, its strengths mattered enormously. Remember, the P-38 was faster in straight flight and in a dive than the Ki-43. Its twin engines gave it a raw power advantage, and its nose-mounted guns delivered a concentrated stream of fire that could destroy a lightly built fighter in a single pass. The Oscar could outturn the Lightning at low speed, certainly, but if Bong refused to play that game, if he kept his speed high, used vertical maneuvers, and never let himself get slow enough for the Oscars to circle behind him, he could survive, and that is exactly what he did. He was not trying to win. He was trying to survive long enough for the math to change. Bong used the P-38's speed to control the fight. When the Oscars closed in, he dove away, building speed they could not match. When a pair of attackers overshot, he pulled up and used the brief window to fire. He did not chase. He did not circle. He slashed through the formation, took his shot, and pulled away before the next group could get behind him. The twin engines of the Lightning gave him another advantage that is easy to overlook. In a single-engine fighter, if your one engine is hit, you're going into the jungle. The P-38 could absorb damage to one engine and still fly. That margin of safety, small as it sounds, was the difference between staying in the fight and falling out of the sky. Several minutes of this passed. Several minutes does not sound like a long time, but in a cockpit, pulling hard turns at over 300 miles per hour with tracers flashing past the canopy, every second stretches out. Fuel draining, ammunition counting down. Now think about this fight from the other side. You are one of 9 Oscar pilots. You have just attacked an Allied airfield. You have the numbers. You have a single enemy fighter surrounded, and yet the target will not go down. He dives away. You follow, but he is faster in the dive. He pulls up, and for a moment you lose sight of him against the clouds. Then he is behind one of your wingmen, firing. The concentrated stream of heavy bullets from the Lightning's nose tears into the Oscar. The Ki-43, built for agility and not for absorbing punishment, comes apart. That is what happened. In the chaos of the swirling fight, Bong found his angle. He caught one of the Oscars exposed and fired. The lightly armored Japanese fighter could not survive the burst from .450 caliber machine guns and a cannon. It went down. The formation of 9 was now 8. But the fight was not over. The remaining Oscar pilots pressed the attack. They still had the numbers. They still had the ability to turn tighter than the P-38 at low speed, and the American pilots' fuel and ammunition were lower than before. Here is where the fuel clock began to matter most. Bong was not just fighting. He was calculating. Every second in the fight was a second of fuel burned. Every round fired was one fewer for the next pass. He had to balance aggression with survival. Too passive, and the Oscars would eventually corner him. Too aggressive, and he would run dry before he could reach home. So he kept moving. Speed up. Dive. Fire when the angle was right. Pull away. Climb back up. Repeat. And then he found a second opening. Another Oscar turned the wrong way, or perhaps held its course 1 second too long. Bong closed in, fired, and watched the second Japanese fighter fall. That was 2 kills in a single engagement, against a formation that outnumbered him 9-1. He also damaged a third, though that one was not confirmed as destroyed. After the second kill, something shifted. The remaining 7 Oscar pilots had watched 2 of their own go down. The American was still flying, still fast, still dangerous, and by now, those Japanese fighters had their own fuel problems. They had flown in from distant bases. They had spent fuel in the attack on the airfield and in the swirling fight against the lone P-38. Their own ammunition was running low. He was not dogfighting. He was running a fuel clock. That was the hidden strategy. Bong did not need to shoot down all 9. He did not even need to shoot down most of them. He needed to survive long enough for the enemy's resources to run thin, and that is what happened. One by one, the Oscars broke off. Some turned for home. Others pulled away to regroup. The circle of attackers loosened, then opened, then dissolved. The sky, which had been full of turning, firing aircraft moments before, was suddenly quiet. Richard Bong was alone again. But this time, alone was the safest place to be. He turned his P-38 toward Horanda. The fuel gauges were dangerously low. The airframe had taken hits, but the twin Allison engines were still running. The wings were still level, and the ground was coming up ahead. The forward airstrip at Horanda was not much to look at. It was carved out of the jungle near the coast. The runway was rough, the facilities were basic, but on March 11, 1943, it was the most welcome piece of ground on the planet. Bong brought the Lightning in low. The fuel situation was critical. There was not much room for a second attempt. He lined up, descended, and set the big twin-engine fighter down. He had made it. When the mechanics looked the P-38 over, they found bullet damage across the airframe. The airplane had been hit multiple times during the fight, but it held together. The armor plate behind the pilot's seat had done its job. The twin-engine design had provided the redundancy that kept him airborne, and the rugged Lockheed construction had absorbed punishment that would have destroyed a lighter aircraft. His squadron, the men who had heard his radio fall silent as the fight began, saw him taxi in. They knew what he had been through. In the world of fighter pilots, where understating danger was a point of pride, what Bong had done spoke louder than any words. the lone pilot had taken on 9 enemy fighters in solo air combat, and had not only survived, but had shot down 2 of them and damaged a third. For this action, Lieutenant Richard Bong was awarded a second Silver Star. And that opened Luke from the beginning of the story? His squadron heard his radio go quiet. Now, they heard it again. He was back. That fight on March 11th was not the end of Richard Bong's story. It was not even the halfway point. Over the next year and a half, the quiet farm boy from Wisconsin became the deadliest American fighter pilot of the entire Second World War. He shot down 40 confirmed enemy aircraft, every single one of them while flying a P-38 Lightning. He earned the Medal of Honor, presented to him by General Douglas MacArthur on a muddy airfield in the Philippines in December of 1944. MacArthur called him one of the bravest of the brave. Bong was modest about his success. When asked how he had become so effective, he once said something like, "I am just lucky, I guess. A lot of Japanese people happen to get in my way, and I keep shooting plenty of lead, and finally some of them get hit." He admitted that his gunnery was not the best, so he compensated by closing to extremely short range before firing. In some cases, he flew so close that he passed through the debris of exploding enemy aircraft. In early 1944, he returned to the Pacific with a new P-38 that he named Marge, after Marjorie Vattendahl, the young woman he had met during a leave in Wisconsin. Her photograph was painted on the nose. They married on February 10, 1945, after Bong was finally sent home for good. But the ending of this story carries a shadow. On August 6, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb fell on Hiroshima, Richard Bong was testing a new Lockheed P-80 jet fighter at an airfield in Burbank, California. The primary fuel pump failed during takeoff. At low altitude, with no time for the ejection and parachute sequence to work, the jet crashed. Major Richard Bong was killed. He was 24 years old. The news of his death shared the front pages of American newspapers with the news from Japan. The New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Los Angeles Times all ran prominent stories about the loss of America's top ace. So let us return to the sky above New Guinea on that March morning in 1943. A single P-38 Lightning surrounded by 9 enemy fighters, outnumbered in a way that no pilot could survive. He did not beat 9 fighters. He outlasted them. He used the P-38's speed to stay out of turning fights he could not win. He used its concentrated firepower to destroy 2 attackers that gave him even a brief opening. He used the twin-engine design to absorb damage and keep flying. And he used his own nerve to stay in the fight long enough for the fuel and ammunition of his attackers to force them away. That engagement, brief and violent, earned Bong a second Silver Star and proved a lesson that would echo across the rest of the air war in the Pacific. The outnumbered fighter pilot who fought 9 enemy planes alone did not survive by being reckless. He survived by being disciplined. He survived by understanding his airplane and knowing what it could and could not do. And he survived because he did not try to win the fight. He tried to last longer than the fight itself. Today, the Richard I Bong Veterans Historical Center stands in Superior, Wisconsin, not far from the farm where a boy once watched mail planes cross the sky. A restored P-38 Lightning sits on display. Visitors walk past photographs, medals, and the story of a 22-year-old lieutenant who flew into impossible odds and flew back out again.